Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm going to talk about the second episode of the second season of Lower Decks. It was called Kayshawn His Eyes Open, Kayshawn being the new chief of security on board the Cerritos. So the episode starts off with a sonic shower scene. Say that 3 times fast. And right away it was curious because, of course, they blurred everybody's pieces parts. Now, that just brings up the whole thing of, well, if they were going to have to do that, why have a shower scene? I mean, they did it on Enterprise too, but they didn't blur the pieces parts. They had them wear very small bottoms, and in the case of the ladies, tops also. And, you know, with this, they could have drawn anything, right? They could have drawn it so that the pieces parts were covered by the shower walls or an opaque force field, but they didn't do that. They made it look like everybody was standing there naked for everyone else in the room to see, but then they blurred the pieces parts. Just a weird choice, if you ask me. It just takes you out of it. But of course, Mariner mentions Boimler, and so you know right away, if you didn't know before, that she's still like stuck on the fact that he's not there anymore. And she gets into sort of a pissing contest with another ensign that's been assigned to the same team that she's on. And they both keep one-upping each other in terms of the intensity of the sonic shower until it gets to a ridiculous, like, dangerous level. And everybody's running out of there screaming except for her and this other guy. And it's supposed to be funny, but it was dumb because those, of course, would have safety protocols, the sonic showers. So were the safety protocols off? Like, that's the thing that keeps bugging me about the show, is that they do things that wouldn't happen on a Starfleet ship. And if you're going to do that, do it, but make it worth it. This was just not worth it. It was a stupid scene. We find out that the Cerritos has been assigned to assist a particular collector from the Collectors Guild, which didn't really exist. I shouldn't say doesn't really exist. It exists now. Didn't really exist in canon before, but it's based on that one collector guy that we saw in that early episode of Next Generation, where that one collector guy tries to collect data, which is funny because once this mission is sort of underway, I think it's the first officer goes, remember when they tried to collect data? And the captain goes, everybody tried to collect data. And the bird guy goes, why couldn't they leave data alone? He just wanted to feel. So it was kind of funny. It was a reference to the whole thing. Anyway, they're assisting one member of the Collectors Guild in transporting the collection of a recently deceased member of the Collectors Guild to some kind of warehouse or set of warehouses or whatever safely, and they needed Starfleet's help, whatever. So they introduced the new security guy, and he is Lieutenant Kathon, and he is a member of the species that Dathon from the episode Darmok is, the same species. I guess they're called the Temerians. So he comes on, and I'm thinking, gee, well, these people only speak in metaphors, so this ought to be interesting. But apparently he's learned Federation Standard, and he also has a universal translator. So between the two things, he mostly speaks in ways that can be understood. But he does, of course, utter the odd Temerian phrase in metaphor, and he even brings up Darmok. He says something like Darmok when he joined the Seven, or something like that. So the next scene we kind of get at this point is a scene taking place on the Titan, where Riker has brought the ship to a place where they're again dealing with the Pakleds who were in last season. So I don't know, but I guess there's a sort of adversarial situation going on there. And he says, you know, to the weapons guy, fire on the Pakled ship, engines or whatever. Let's see how these guys operate with their aft hanging out, which, okay, haha, funny. Back on the Cerritos, the new ensign guy that Mariner had been competing with mentions Tanagra to Kayshawn, and that was funny because, of course, Tanagra was mentioned in Darmok. We see that in the collection of the deceased collector, there was a box of Chateau Picard, and because the Starfleet team had arrived late to the ship where the collection was residing, he says, you guys are late. What happened? Did you stop off along the way to debate the human rights of a robot? Which, of course, is a reference to the plot of Measure of a Man, one of the greatest Next Generation episodes, and it was from the first season, of course. Anyway, that was funny. So they're going around, doing the job of securing the collection or whatever it is, and the Orion ensign comes across an artifact, and she goes, "Oh, look, Kahless's fornication helmet," which is funny because, of course, a Klingon would have a fornication helmet, and of course it would be Kahless, Kahless's helmet. But so that's funny. But see, this is one of the things, like, I wouldn't say this bothers me so much, but I have to now acknowledge that in the canon now, Klingons use fornication helmets. And that's funny on Lower Decks because it's poking fun at the Klingons, and it's saying that the Klingons have dumb, rituals, and they do dumb things, that we would consider dumb. And that's not how the Klingons should be treated. That's not how they're treated on the live action shows. But now that's part of the canon, that Klingons use fornication helmets. You know what I'm saying? Like, unless they come out and say that Lower Decks is not canon, it's just a riff on Star Trek. But they haven't said that. So now fornication helmets are part of Klingon lore throughout the entirety of Star Trek. And I think that cheapens the Klingons, and it cheapens Star Trek. And it's one of the reasons I don't like this show. In and of itself, it's funny as hell, and I get it. They're poking fun at Star Trek and poking fun at Klingon lore, but it's part of the canon, so it irritates me. Anyway, there's more mentions of references from the Darmok episode. Somebody mentions Timba. I think it's Kayshon. The crew accidentally sets off some kind of alarm, and the ship starts to attack them because it thinks they're stealing the collection. And in all of this, Ensign Kathon, or Lieutenant Kathon rather, gets turned into a puppet, which is kind of funny. So they're carrying him around as a puppet for the rest of the episode. Anyway, switch back over to the crew of the Titan, and Riker has sent some members of his crew on an away mission to pretend to be miners that are mining something or other on a planet that's been taken over by the Pakleds. And there's a conversation about the Enterprise D because one of the women had served on the D before. And she says, "Oh, it was fine if you like living on a ship with 5 daycares." And, Boimler, who looks up to the Enterprise crew and thinks highly of the Enterprise itself, says something like, "What are you talking about? They had all kinds of adventures. They went to different dimensions." And she says they had string quartets every day or something. And he goes, "Yeah, but they did this, they did that, they insurrected," which of course is a reference to the film Insurrection, Star Trek Insurrection, which again was funny. We go back to the crew of the Cerritos. They are now trying to figure out how to get off this ship without being killed. And they're walking through areas of the ship to get to the escape pods, I guess. And they come across a room of the collection where there's a giant skeleton hanging from the ceiling that appears to be humanoid. And it's wearing an original series uniform with a blue top. Now, it's never acknowledged what that is, but I think it's supposed to be the skeleton of Giant Spock from Star Trek The Animated Series that was produced back in the 70s. I can't imagine what the hell else it is. And so I'm thinking it's got to be that, which is funny because that would make the animated series canon for sure, which, in the past, it's been in and out of canon. It's been considered canon at some points and considered not part of canon at other points. So that would sort of put it squarely in the canon camp, but they never say what it is exactly. So I don't know, maybe it doesn't, but it's just a thing that was there and it caught my attention, and there you go. They're walking further into the collection and there's a diorama that they go past. Again, they don't acknowledge it, but it's a scene from the Savage Curtain. And there's a skeleton there that is wearing, President Lincoln's top hat. And there's a creature from the episode, and they don't mention it, but you know what it is. And so my question is that Abraham Lincoln's actual skeleton? Because Abraham Lincoln wasn't there. It was a fake version of him. And I don't remember whether that version was flesh and blood. It might have been. And if so, is it that skeleton? Like what? I don't understand why a skeleton as opposed to like a full wax dummy with the, fake flesh and everything. So I don't know. But anyway, that's there. And that's a reference to the Savage Curtain, whatever. Then we flash back to the crew of the Titan who have gotten into a bit of trouble. They're trying to get off the planet. They're being pursued because they're being pursued by the Pakleds who have figured out why they're there. And there's a containment field of some kind that's keeping them from beaming out. And so Boimler's like, "Oh yeah, something like this happened with the Enterprise once. And it resulted in Riker being cloned. He has a clone named Thomas. And he's in Starfleet, and he just mentions that whole thing. We go back to the crew of Cerritos. They realize they have to cut through a wall to get out, and they devise a way to do this with some of the artifacts that are lying around. And I was like, they don't have phasers? They didn't take phasers on an away mission? I mean, I know they weren't expecting trouble, but like, isn't it standard loadout when you go away from the ship? I don't know. But of course, they manage to escape, and they bring the puppet Kathon back to the ship, and he gets turned back into himself. But because they had trouble beaming through the containment field, everybody gets out except Boimler at first, and then they beam Boimler aboard. And then a minute later, another Boimler shows up in the shuttlecraft that they had originally landed in. So now Boimler has a transporter clone, and there are two Boimlers in the Star Trek universe and in the Lower Decks universe. Starfleet didn't let one of them remain on the Titan, so naturally one of them went back to the Cerritos as an ensign. So, which is dumb, by the way. Why would he get demoted? That doesn't make any sense. But anyway, now there are two Boimlers on the show. So what we don't know is, are they going to keep going back and forth between the Titan and the Cerritos and show the new Boimler along with the original Boimler? What happens to the guy that was added to the group in this episode? It all remains to be seen. Again, this was a funny episode. It didn't screw with canon a whole lot. It didn't present too many things that made you go, ugh, that would never happen on a Starfleet ship. But those little things were kind of sort of still in there. I mean, their whole behavior set is not how Starfleet officers would behave. It's sort of an exaggeration. I'm starting to come to peace with it in that I look at it and go, okay, Starfleet officers that we've seen up until Lower Decks probably thought these things and felt these things. They just didn't say them or act on them. And this is what would happen if they did say them out loud and act on them. So I'm getting more comfortable with it as time goes on. But, I can't say just yet that I love the show. Before the episode closes, the Kayshon character does try to use a pickup line on someone in the lounge, and it doesn't work. And he says, Shaka when the walls fell. So they got that last Darmok reference in there. Decent episode, funny, didn't hate it. That's about it. And I'll be back with a review of the next episode once it is released. Until then, I say once again, my friends, peace and long life.